3525. The second expert of the cataclysmic front, the Greenwood Wolf King Walter Chen, in such a broken state and crying miserable appearance, seemed to have hammered a heavy punch on the heart of everyone in the cataclysmic front. Although they did not know what it was like to have their consciousness imprisoned in their bodies. But seeing Walter's current appearance caused their hearts to be terrified to the core of their being of this unknown taste. No one dares to imagine, if such a thing happens to them, what kind of feeling they would be, helpless and worse than death. That really is to call the day, not to answer, not to call the ground. It was also at this moment that deep inside their hearts, they were completely filled with hellish fear of Charlie. Originally thought that 3 of the 4 war kings were destroyed in Charlie's hands, and another one was destroyed in the Middle East. But who would have thought that these 4, it turns out, were destroyed in Charlie's hands? Joseph also panicked. He subconsciously asked Charlie, "The matter of Syria was done by you?" Quote. Charlie nodded his head and said very frankly, "Yes, I did it. The reason why Hamid was able to annihilate several thousand soldiers of you was all thanks to my guidance. The reason why the government forces were able to capture more than 10,000 soldiers of you was also all thanks to my help." Quote. At this moment, Joseph's psychological defense line completely collapsed. He finally understood that the revenge he had been preparing for 20 years was just a farce of hitting a stone with an egg. Charlie's power had far exceeded his perception. Not to mention that he was not Charlie's opponent, the entire cataclysmic front combined might not be Charlie's opponent. Joseph looked at Walter again, and seeing his tearful, desperate and fearful appearance, his heart was like passing through the time of his mother's death. Then, he looked at Charlie, holding back his inner humiliation, clasped his fist and begged, "Charlie. It's me, Joseph, who is ignorant of Mount I. Please let Harmen and Walter go." Quote. Let me take my parents' coffins and leave, and from today onwards, Cataclysmic Front will leave China immediately and will never come back again. Quote. Charlie laughed coldly, "You want to negotiate with me even though you're dying. What do you think you are?" Quote. Outside, you are the head of the Cataclysmic Frontal, but here, you are just a FCU King Evil Dog that is looking for death. Quote. Joseph's expression was austere as he asked him, "Then what do you want to be satisfied with?" Quote. Charlie smiled and blandly said, "Don't rush, it's not time for me to say the conditions, let me introduce you to another old acquaintance." Quote. Then, Charlie gave Luther another look. Luther understood and went back to the spirit of Charlie's parents and pulled Zynn, who was kneeling there, over as well. Joseph did not know who this person was again, but he could be sure that this person must have a close relationship with himself. After Zynn was brought to Charlie, Charlie looked at Joseph and asked him with a smile, "Joseph, before unlocking this old acquaintance of yours, I have something that I have not shared with you properly since you came to the mountain until now." Quote. So we might as well run through this matter first. Quote. Joseph cautiously asked, "What is it?" Quote. Chapter 3526. Charlie lightly said, "I heard that your father was a core member of the Anti-Weight Alliance, back then, bent on following the Sioux family's side, with them against my father, but my father never did anything against your father, this point, you can admit." Quote. Joseph said in a loud voice, "Back then again the futures market, it was your father who made a game to lure my father into a trap." Quote. My father lost his entire family fortune. Because of this, he chose to commit suicide by jumping off a building. And because of his suicide, my mother took the medicine and killed herself. This is all thanks to your father. Quote. Charlie's expression grew cold and he said, "Your FCU King Bull 5 hitting." Quote. In the business world, everything changes rapidly. Your father was not capable, limited, and did not know himself. Quote. Who the H3LL is to blame if he thought he was going to enter the futures market and try to compete with my father, only to have my father beat him legitimately and lose all his assets. Quote. It's his own inability and limited level, what did it have to do with my father? Quote. Speaking of which, Charlie gave a slight beating and continued, if your father just couldn't do it, so be it, the big deal is to go back to sleep and rise again. Quote. But he had not even enough psychological strength, he had to run to the roof and jump down, this can also be blamed on my father. Quote. And your mother. Your father committed suicide, but she left you behind and took the poison herself to die, does this have anything to do with my father? Quote. Joseph was not convinced and angrily blurted out, this was all your father's conspiracy. Quote. Charlie stared at him and asked coldly, according to you, you are as self-righteous, narrow-minded, weak, limited, and unaware as your father was back then. Quote. You even took the initiative to come to Waiteresque Mountain and shamelessly say that you wanted to raise my parents' graves. And now you are at the disadvantage and lose your life. Is this all a conspiracy by me? Quote. Joseph's expression instantly froze, Charlie's words hit his soul, making it impossible for him to refute. Charlie looked at him and said coldly, Joseph, you are the same today as your father was back then. All of them are to blame. Even if you die 10,000 times, you are still to blame. Quote. Joseph was already in tears at this point. He knew that what Charlie said was right. The current self, like his father back then, had taken the initiative to provoke a character he could not afford to provoke at all, and subsequently suffered a complete defeat. And the so-called parental hatred was just a blind hatred that had been pent up deep inside his heart for many years as he had voiced his own injustice for his parents. Just as his inner faith began to collapse, Charlie pointed at Zynn beside him and said in a cold voice, come, let you meet the great benefactor of your Wan family back then. Quote. Saying that, Charlie ripped off the black cloth bag that was covering Zynn's head. In this instant, Joseph's whole body was struck by lightning. He naturally recognized Zynn. Although so many years had passed, but Zynn is an adult, appearance has not changed much, only a little older than before, so Joseph almost the first time he recognized him. He subconsciously blurted out, Sue, Uncle Sue. Quote. Zhengfeng, the old man of the Su family, at this time is also completely confused, the eldest son missing for so long without any news, did not expect to be in the hands of Charlie. Zynn at this time to see his father as well as Joseph, is also wide-eyed, want to say something, but the mouth is still plugged with a towel, so a word cannot be sent out. Charlie pulled the towel off his mouth, Zynn hurriedly said to Joseph, Joseph, you're confused. Quote. Joseph was already in tears at this point and choked, Uncle Sue, it's really you, for so many years, I have never forgotten your great kindness to the Wan family, but for so many years I did not get in touch with you for various reasons, so please forgive me. Zynn was also red-eyed and choked, what a time to say this. Charlie then opened his mouth and said to Zynn, Mr. Sue, Arthur Wan was your man at the beginning, and no one knows more about the anti-Wade alliance than you. Quote. So you say in front of Joseph what really happened back then, and who was actually responsible for the whole thing. Quote. Saying that, Charlie instructed another sentence, you must start from objective facts. Do not deliberately cater to me, not to deliberately avoid your own responsibility, as long as what you say is indeed the objective truth, you say anything I will not pursue. Quote. But if you dare to say half a word of falsehood, I will kill you in front of my parents' spirit wit. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel Salva channel for new updates, thank you very much and keep safe everyone.